Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News of this Sunday, the 4th day of August, 2024. As we wait for the frightening war to begin in the Middle East, former US Ambassador David Friedman has the perfect solution to avoid it. Iran has refused to have diplomatic overtures to moderate their military response, and England, as we see, is on the brink. These are the three headlines we'll look at this afternoon. Headline number one, and this one's fascinating. Former U.S. Ambassador David Friedman says how to avoid a regional war in the Middle East. What's his solution? Well, he believes that if Trump were in power, he would threaten devastating harm to Iran's industries if they were to attack. Former U.S. Ambassador David Friedman took to social media on Sunday to criticize the way the Biden administration is contending with Iran's threats to attack Israel and shared what he would do instead. According to Friedman, Biden and Harris are taking the approach. They are pleading with Iran not to attack or to attack symbolically only. In exchange, they promise that they will pressure Israel for concessions. He continues to note, so far, Iran's response has been the back of its hand. It publicly proclaims, and Friedman says, I think falsely, that it is ready for a regional war. And it is hardly frightened by a feckless American regime that has showered it with sanctions relief and other benefits. Isn't that the truth? America has the chance to disabuse Iran of its overconfidence with its military assets it has brought to the region. Will it? We'll soon see how this all evolves. He believes that Donald Trump's approach would be different and better. Something like this. Please attack as you see fit. We've been looking for a reason to destroy your oil production facilities and set your finances back 30 years. Go for it. It's hard to see Iran taking that risk. He added, we'll be talking about this for months, especially after all this plays out. But regardless of policies and politics, I am here in Israel and praying for better times and for the safety and security of all who live here. You know, that's exactly what Trump did the last time around when he was president, when there was a threat by Iran. Basically, he said, and he said this to little rocket man too in North Korea. If you don't, knuckle under here to what we're saying, we could reduce your country to a cinder. And he said the same thing to Iran. And guess what? Iran backed off because they were afraid of what Trump would do because he would do it. We see just the opposite from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They're pleading with them, saying, we'll do this, we'll do that. Look, you've got the strongest, the best army in the world, the best military in the world. All you do is say, don't do this to Israel. If you decide to do something terrible like this and start a regional war, we will make it where you're back to the Stone Age, as it were. In fact, that's what one of the Lebanese politicians said earlier this year, if you recall. He said, if we go to war, that is Hezbollah, with Israel, they will bomb us back to the Stone Age. So both Lebanon and Iran are looking at this sort of thing if they do attack Israel. We'll see what happens. But the threat of this, and because Trump, when he threatened, he would follow through with it. Biden and Harris, there's no threat whatsoever. And so we'll see what happens. And it's going to lead us to our next headline. Iran rejects pleas to moderate the response. We don't care if it sparks a war because they know the U.S. already stopped Israel the last time. Remember in April, Iran did this horrific attack against Israel. Remember those 2 nights of bombing with the rockets, the missiles, with the drones, everything they threw at Israel. Fortunately, it was thwarted. But basically, the U.S. said, "Now don't respond to this." And there was a real small response to one of their, in the middle of the country, one of their actually it was an important asset, one of the near their nuclear facilities, but they didn't do any real damage like they could have. Now that was then, and this is now, because remember what we said this morning. Joe Biden is a lame duck. He's going to be out in 5 months. And so any pressure he can give, any threats are going to be very short-lived because he's not going to be in office come January. Now, we don't know yet who's going to be, but it certainly isn't going to be him. So he has lost his power, his authority, and Netanyahu again in Israel, believe me, if they get the chance, they will do what they can to Iran. They will do what they can to Lebanon because they don't want these threats still overhanging them in the future. So again, we'll wait and see. Sadly, the U.S. will not be participating in the strong response that it could, and that's just it is hard to appreciate that as an American because we've been so strong in the past. But recall what we've said in our 25 Signs We're Near the End, our book that you can get as a free download on our website, Educating Our World. Sign number 11. Something will happen to the United States. They're not a player in last days Bible prophecy. When the Ezekiel 38-39 scenario comes around for these nations to attack Israel, led by Russia, there's no one that comes to the aid of Israel. And no one, by the way, that this leader of the coalition, Gog is his title, is afraid of, meaning the United States is not a player, meaning the United States will lose its stature militarily and politically and whatever other morally in the world at that time, and will not come to Israel's aid, even though they're attacked from all these countries there, including Iran, Turkey, and Russia. And so the downfall of the U.S., it is sad to see, but it's something that we predicted for years because we're just not there at the time of the end. And when Israel is attacked, nobody is afraid of any response from any country, and no response comes from any country. No one, comes to their aid except the God of the Bible does. They weren't counting on that, and that's who destroys these incoming armies. And so it is sad to watch this about the United States, watch us going down militarily, morally, economically, spiritually, the whole bit. But that's what's taking place right now. And so a strong response to Iran saying, look, again, like Friedman said, if you do this, we'll bomb you back to 30 years, like the Stone Age, just like what we can do to Lebanon. For your finances back. You really want to take that risk, and the U.S. could do it. But this is not Donald Trump, it's Joe Biden. All right, so which leads to our second headline. Iran rejects pleas to moderate the response. We don't care if it starts a war because they know there'll be restraint on the part of the U.S. Washington urges restraint, but it seems Tehran is determined to respond to the assassination of Hamas leader on its territory and is undeterred, despite being warned that any significant attack against Israel will provoke a counter response. Iran has rejected intense efforts by the U.S. and Arab diplomats to moderate its response to the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the Wall Street Journal reported today, Sunday. Since the killing, Iranian leaders have vowed retaliation, with sources familiar with the discussion indicating that Iranian officials have stated, we don't care if our response sparks a war. And why don't they care? Because any war that it will spark from the U.S. will not be a devastating war that it could be, because they know who's in charge, and that's the Biden-Harris administration, who will not do what they need to do. Now, our third story here is one that we've talked about the last couple of days with the U.S., both the U.S. and the U.K., basically not helping out Israel in their time of need. And we go back to Genesis 12, 1-3, 4,000 years ago, to the promise God made to Abram and his descendants. He will bless those who bless the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he will curse those who curse. Recently, we've seen the Labour government, the new Labour government in the UK, agree with the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, and decided to issue an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu if he does step on their soil. And also, as we saw, David Lammy, the new defense minister, is withholding certain military assets that Israel needs to fight the upcoming war with Iran and its proxies. So right away, they've done two things very much anti-Israel. Give the okay for a arrest warrant for Netanyahu if he wanted to visit the UK, and withhold some of the needed weaponry against Iran and the proxies for an upcoming fight. Well, these actions will have consequences. Well, listen to what's going on right now in the UK. England on the brink. Starmer, he's the leftist new prime minister, Keir Starmer vows swift action against anti-immigration extremists. The government advisor backs COVID-style lockdowns to stop riots. Did you hear that? Listen, British Prime Minister Sir Keir, I guess you pronounce it Keir Starmer, has vowed that police have the full support in taking on extremists, and anti-mass migration protests and riots have broken out across the UK following the mass stabbing at a children's dance party in Southport earlier this week. Facing a full-blown crisis less than a month into office, recently elected leftist, I should say, let's put far leftist, I always say far right. Recently elected far leftist Prime Minister Starmer gathered top cabinet members on Saturday as unrest erupted in dozens of towns and cities throughout the UK, and in many cases in typical Labour Party strongholds in the north of England, in response to the slaying of 3 young girls and the stabbing of 8 others, including children, allegedly by a 17-year-old Rwandan heritage second grader, 17-year-old Rwandan heritage second generation immigrant on Monday. Okay. The Guardian, citing the far-left Hope Not Hate organization, reported that an estimated 35 locations had been scheduled to see protests on Saturday, some of which saw violent clashes between participants and the police, as well as attacks on businesses, particularly in Belfast, Hull, Liverpool, and Manchester. According to the Telegraph, at least 90 arrests were made throughout the country on Sunday. A Downing Street spokesman told the paper, the Prime Minister set out that the police have our full support to take against extremists that are on our streets who are attacking our police officers, disrupting local businesses, and attempting to sow hate by intimidating communities. The Prime Minister ended by saying, the right to freedom of expression and the violent disorder we have seen are two very different things. He said there is no excuse for violence of any kind and reiterated that the government backs the police to take all necessary action to keep our streets safe. The hardline rhetoric from the far left PM, who has characterized the protests and riots as far right, no, it's always far right that are doing this, on the outpouring of rage and violence has been contrasted, now get this, to his response to the deadly and deeply destructive Black Lives Matter riots in 2020, where he infamously took the knee in solidarity with the Marxist movement and described those as people rightly demanding justice. So it was okay for Keir Starmer to take a knee and to agree with the Black Lives Matter as they burned down, cities, killed people and the such like. That's fine because they had legitimate grief. But when it happens in his backyard, it's not right. Again, the hypocrisy of the left here. The government has also faced criticism for refusing to discuss footage posted on social media appearing to show violent responses from a large group of Muslims or leftist counter protests. Now, we've seen a few of those videos have made it. The UK Daily Mail had one where there was much of violent response from Muslims in this particular situation, but you don't hear that, do you? You only hear about the so-called far right. The Prime Minister's response to his first crisis of his expected 5-year term, oh boy, has been heavily criticized by the Reform UK party of Nigel Farage, who accused Starmer of failing to address the root cause of anger, which is, of course, mass migration. And this is one of the issues the Tories, the previous government, didn't really deal with correctly. And Labour got in because they said they would be more hard-nosed with this because the mass migration that is taking place in the UK, just like here in the US, is really, destroying so many of the, foundations of the country there. And so on Friday, Farage's deputy Boston and Skegness MP Richard Tice said, many millions of concerned British citizens are furious at lawless Britain, children being slaughtered, machete mobs abound, soldiers being stabbed, police violently attacked an airport. Instead of empathy, Keir Starmer labeled the folk as far right, out of touch, and clueless. However, others have demanded the government go farther, including Tory leadership candidate and former Home Secretary Priti Patel, who called on Starmer to recall Parliament to hold an emergency session of unrest. And so what's interesting also, they've talked about doing some type of lockdown to the country, like what happened at COVID and locked the whole country down. And in other words, everybody has to stay inside, and this would calm the unrest. And if you go outside, you would be arrested, just like we had during the height of the COVID thing. You couldn't go out to certain places in certain hours. You couldn't drive on the streets. And we even had it here in Southern Cal. You'd be arrested if you did something like that because of the lockdown that was there, the local curfew. And so they're talking about doing something like that. Okay, the U.S. is also threatening Israel at this time. They're feeling the heat, and now we've got the UK doing the same thing. And what do we see? We see trouble for both, simply because God said, "I'll bless those that bless and curse those that curse." And the ones that are going to get it the worst, of course, are Iran and its surrogates when and if and when they do attack Israel, which would come, of course, like we say, at any time. So it's a big mess, everybody. We know that. We're praying that God will supernaturally intervene some way, but because we have a feckless and weak administration, the U.S., that will threaten any real response to Iran, what do they got to lose? Now, Israel can do that. And Israel, the good news is, like we talked about today, Netanyahu is not afraid of Biden anymore because he's a lame duck. You don't have to put up with him for another 4 years. So he could do some real damage to Iran's infrastructure to keep them, from being the big dog, as it were, as we say here in America, or the big the sheriff of the whole Middle East. They want to run the show. They want to be the one most feared by all the other countries. That's why they're trying to put this coalition. They're putting this coalition together, but they're not going to be that. We know from Scripture, Russia will be the country that eventually does that. All right. Again, our resources on our website, Educating Our World, are there for you. Please take advantage of them. 12 books on Bible prophecy, which deal with basically what's going to happen as far as the world is concerned. 25 signs. We're near the end. We're looking at these. We're seeing them being fulfilled right now, miraculously, as the world sets up for the coming of the Lord and certain events that are predicted to precede it. So we'll keep an eye on this, like we said, and if anything breaks, we'll break in whenever we can to give you the latest. I'm Don Stewart. Again, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, as always, may our Lord richly, richly bless you.